The benefits of walking are tremendous, and that shouldn't be understated. An interval walk a day keeps dementia at bay. I like to say that, and it's true.
From the offices of the Weill Cornell Medicine Brain and Spine Center in New York City, this is Your Brain with Dr. Phil Steig. Internationally renowned scientist and researcher, Dr. Phil Steig is neurosurgeon-in-chief of the New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. This week, Dr. Steig and his guest explore why your brain hates exercise.
Hello. I'd like to welcome Professor Jennifer Heisz, award-winning neuroscientist from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and an evangelist for the positive benefits of exercise on brain health. Her recent book, Move the Body, Heal the Mind, explores exercise and its benefits in dealing with depression, anxiety, addictions, sleep disorders, and even slowing dementia. And as a side benefit, how it enhances your focus and can boost your creativity. Dr. Heisz, thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So in reading through your book, Move the Body, Heal the Mind, one can't help but note how this seems to represent both a personal saga and also your life as a neuroscientist. Can you expound on that a little bit?
That's right. I did come into this research on a personal journey. In my graduate school, I was studying very fundamental questions about the brain, and it became very apparent to me that something wasn't quite right with my own brain. So I sought some help, but wasn't really getting it from the traditional medical community. And so on a whim, I borrowed a friend's rusty old road bike, and those bike rides really soothed my mind. They got me through the stress of graduate school, and from that point forward, I really did shift my whole focus of research onto the benefits of exercise for the brain.
Just so everybody understands that when you say something wasn't right with my brain, you had the problems that everybody else has, some anxiety, maybe some eating disorder issues, and a little bit of depression. So everything that we all face on a day-to-day basis. And it seems to me that you got onto that bike, but then you also have gone to extremes. You're competing in triathlons. Can you clarify for me what should mere mortals like me do?
Yeah, well, I'll preface this by saying I have never been an athlete. And so, yes, this triathlon business was a new venture for me, and it did give me something to focus on during a sort of a difficult transition in my own personal life. But no, the benefits of exercise are so beautiful. You can get them with just a walk. A walk a day is something a lot of people do anyways, and this gives them tremendous benefits for both their body and their brain.
I was fascinated by your first chapter because I have to admit I'm a bit older than you. I've experienced this one too many times of, every time I'm going to get in shape, and I've started so many times. And your explanation made me feel better about myself, about how the brain shuts you down and stops you from continuing exercise. Can you explain that to us all?
Yeah, I think this is such an important message, is that the brain is actually hardwired to conserve energy. And so by virtue of that, it makes us lazy. We're not lazy people, but the brain wants to conserve energy, in any voluntary movement, just for fun or for health, the brain sees as an extravagant expense, and it doesn't want to have it. And so it goes out of its way to protest. You're too tired. Do you even have time? And so this can really derail even our best intentions.
So that kind of implies that there's an integration between the metabolic center of the brain, the hypothalamus, and also that emotional cognitive component that talks you out of going out there and exercising.
Absolutely, absolutely. The brain is so interconnected. The brain and the body communicate so much more than many people realize, especially centers like the amygdala, which is our threat detection and fear. That talks directly to our hypothalamus, which then can send shockwaves through the body in the form of stress.
You have a myriad of examples throughout the book, and I want to get into some of them. But before we start doing that, can you kind of give a 10,000-foot overview of why exercise is good for the brain from a neurochemical and an anti-inflammatory standpoint.
The brain relies on the body moving. And when we move our muscles, neurochemicals are released from the muscles into the bloodstream, and they travel all the way to the brain, giving the brain what it needs to thrive. And these are the nutrients the brain needs to thrive. So without movement, we're not getting those. We're not getting things like growth factors that support the growth and function of brain cells. We're not getting dopamine that gives our brain the reward it needs to feel good. We're not getting the serotonin regulation that we need to ward off things like dementia or depression and to keep us calm under stressful situations.
In the book, you provide excellent guides to what are appropriate exercises. Just in thinking about it, is there a time period that somebody should walk? Is there a heart rate that they should try to achieve? What do you propose?
I guess it depends on where they're starting and what they want to achieve. So for many people who aren't moving that much or haven't been moving that much lately, any movement counts. Some is better than none. And that, I think, is a very good goal to achieve. However, if you're regularly walking and you want to improve your brain health and ward off dementia, I recommend trying interval walking. And so interval walking is your regular walk, but intermittently you're picking up the pace. So between light posts, you're adding a few hills, and basically you want to pick up your pace to the point where it's difficult to talk. So you can't really have a conversation, and that's when you know you're walking fast enough to get the benefits.
So your book is chock full with how exercise is good for certain things, and I'd like to touch on a few of them. And the ones that I've picked are the ones that we all experience pretty much on a day-to-day basis. So this is a good make yourself feel better situation. Let's talk about anxiety. Why is running better for you in regard to anxiety?
So anxiety is actually just the brain's natural response to a stressor. It can be good. It can alert our brain, get us focused on the problem at hand, and help us solve it. The problem becomes when anxiety goes from 0 to 100 and it gets ahead of us and takes over. This fear starts manifesting as like racing heart, difficulty breathing, difficulty thinking. And so the beautiful thing about exercise is that you can use it to expose yourself in a controlled manner to these symptoms. So you get essentially habituated or used to them, and you can tolerate them more. So that when your heart starts to race during exercise, you can be like, okay, I'm just gonna allow it to race and stop. You have full control over that situation, and then you learn, oh, well, I have that same control over the situation when I'm not exercising, but when I'm experiencing a stressor. And so it allows people to be less reactive to a stress. It essentially tones the stress system.
I found it interesting how you related this to, I guess you had just had a child and you're still a graduate student or you're working, whatever, and the stress of marriage, graduate studies, and all this really got to you and was creating incredible anxiety. What was the insight that you think you can relay to people? And what made you realize, wait a minute, this is all anxiety. Now I'm going to go start trying to get help. And also the fact that you tried to get help and you got drugs and that didn't work. Mm-hmm. Relay that story.
Yeah, I think it's difficult when you're in the throes of it to really recognize what's going on because it's such a funny puzzle, right? You're trying to think your way out of a problem with your thinking. And so the beautiful thing about exercise is it gets you out of your head and into your body. Once I started these bike rides, it was just amazing. The feeling I got after riding, I had so much peace and so much calm that I hadn't for years. I just couldn't get enough of that feeling. And eventually, you associate that feel-good feeling with the ride, and it's something that you just need. Exercise has this incredible anti-inflammatory effect, which protects it against chronic stress. And when we're under chronic stress, it affects the immune system. The immune system becomes overreactive, and that's not a good thing. And that extra inflammation in the body moves into the brain, and it starts to create symptoms that look a lot like depression and anxiety. And so the nice thing about exercise is that it's anti-inflammatory. So an acute bout, it causes a little bit of inflammation at first, but once you stop exercising, just after your first workout, it sends in this anti-inflammatory crew that cleans up all that inflammation created by exercise and then some. And so you end up being less inflamed. And the more you come back to exercise, over time, the less and less inflamed you become. All that regulation of the immune system helps regulate the mind, and you're back to thinking clearly and feeling better.
I was actually somewhat surprised to learn that, 1/3 of the population that start taking serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac or Zoloft for depression, are non-responders.
Yeah, it is surprising that 1 in 3 people don't respond to antidepressants. And there's really no conversation to patients about this from the doctor. So it can be really frustrating, as you can imagine. You show up to the doctor's office, finally getting the courage to seek the help you need. You get the medication and it doesn't work. And you go back, you get a new medication, it still doesn't work. And the problem is that the assumption is that all forms of depression come from the same source, which is a lack of serotonin in the brain. But this is not true. This is not true. And so when we give drugs that treat that low serotonin, it doesn't work because that's not the problem for them. They already have enough serotonin in their brain. The problem is something else. And often that something else is related to stress. Stress reactivity stimulates the immune system, causes extra inflammation in the body that infiltrates the brain and starts to create these symptoms.
And you talk a lot about the immune system hyperdrive that kind of kicks in as a result of stress. On this show, we keep emphasizing that stress is bad, and I think in America that's hard to avoid, but it is bad. So talk about the immune system hyperdrive and how running really helps shut that down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe I'll have a sort of a caveat around stress is bad. In fact, stress is inevitable, as you mentioned, is part of our life, but it really is in our reaction to stress that makes it so dangerous. So it's that, getting really angry, getting really tense when things don't go as expected or as planned, and sort of trying to keep a more even keel. So this is one way that exercise is extremely beneficial, is that it helps you regulate your response to stress. So you're less moody, less up and down, and you keep much more of an even keel.
I also found it fascinating how you described the benefit of hard workout. So you really get that lactate, release in your muscles, and it, really hurts. But in a sense, you describe that as being beneficial because once that gets up into the certain parts of your brain, it stimulates new nerve cells. Mm-hmm. Describe that for us.
Yeah, so this is one of the most interesting findings. Lactate, which if you've ever been to a spinning class or a workout class, the fitness instructor is always saying, okay, we got to flush out that lactate, get rid of that bad stuff. And it turns out lactate is actually one of the greatest promoters of neuroplasticity. It moves directly from the muscles to the brain into a region called the hippocampus, which is important for memory. It's damaged by Alzheimer's disease, but it's also one of the regions in the brain that can birth new brain cells throughout our lifetime, even into older age. And so by giving the hippocampus lactate, it can grow stronger and fortify against dementia.
So it keeps you forever young, right?
Forever young. In heart and mind.
In heart and mind. I wanted to touch upon that next. Is you describe various workouts in your book, which I think are excellent. Let's face it, an 80-year-old shouldn't be trying to do what a 25-year-old should be doing. So is it exercise in general, or actually are there specific exercises for specific effects? And then finally, what's the age-appropriate exercise?
It is very personal, and maybe it's not necessarily age appropriate, but ability appropriate or fitness appropriate. I know lots of older people who are much fitter than any 20-year-old. And so it does come back to your own personal exercise tolerance, which can be independent of age, in fact. I do have these specific workouts at the back of each chapter. It can be difficult to prescribe exercise for somebody who's anxious because a lot of the time, people who are experiencing symptoms of anxiety are also anxiety sensitive, meaning that they have this fear of the symptoms of fear itself. So when their heart starts racing, they think they're having a heart attack. When they're hyperventilating, they think they're going to suffocate, or when they can't think, they think they're losing their mind. For these individuals, often they don't like exercising, and they certainly don't like doing it intensely. But the kicker is that these individuals stand to benefit the most. One way that we can slowly, gradually, safely introduce exercise into their life is almost like a way of exposure therapy. I have the Fear Buster workout where we, a few seconds at a time, start introducing exercise. Just quick sprints so that they can feel their heart racing, they can feel their breath, rushing in and out, and get used to those symptoms, almost like an exposure as a habituation to those symptoms so that they lose their power over them and they're not as scary.
Many of us have faced the challenge of our brain's natural resistance to exercise. In this edition of This Is Your Brain, the Guided Tour, we look at one company that has found an answer to this problem by making exercise addictive. Think of a compelling social media platform. Display it on a giant, high-definition touchscreen, and then bolt that screen to the front of a sleek and fabulously expensive exercise bike. You have just recreated the Peloton, the most successful exercise product of the last decade. The founders of Peloton have described how they look to the addictive experiences of video games, binge-watching Netflix, or shopping on Amazon in designing their company. Riding a Peloton bike is a convincing internet simulation of a social experience. Online users are organized into virtual classes where they can video chat with other Peloton friends while being urged to pedal faster by impossibly good-looking virtual instructors. The sense of competition is enhanced by constant feedback data on each user's heart rate, distance covered, and watts of energy generated, being continuously displayed on a leaderboard which ranks them against a worldwide network of more than 2 million users. Users can click on the leaderboard to provide virtual high fives to each other for a job well done. Like all successful video games, each little victory stimulates a tiny dopamine hit in the user's brain, turning the Peloton ride into an addictive habit. This simulated sense of community is Peloton's primary product. They describe themselves as an interactive media company that just happens to sell exercise equipment. In the summer of 2020, the global pandemic began to isolate people in their homes. This created a hunger for any form of communal activity, and Peloton sales jumped an astounding 172% in 6 months. With a starting price of $2,000, not to mention the logo emblazoned shoes, workout gear, and the $40 a month membership fees, Peloton has managed to engineer an online experience that is as expensive as it is addictive.
Exercise doesn't seem to always have to be exhausting to be good for you. Can you differentiate the difference between high versus low impact exercise like walking?
I think the benefits of walking are tremendous, and that shouldn't be understated. An interval walk a day keeps dementia at bay. I like to say that, and it's true. I would say for most people, the focus should be on consistency rather than intensity, and keep coming back to something that you enjoy to do, but always have an eye to move a little more every day.
In the book, you kind of emphasize basically 30 minutes 5 times a week. Is that a reasonable goal, you think?
There are guidelines for physical health, which are weekly, 150 minutes per week of moderate, like a brisk walk, or you could get by with less vigorous. So it's 75 minutes of vigorous activity. Those are based on studies done for physical health. You can get by with less for your brain. The brain doesn't need as much as the muscles of the body. My goal is to just get people moving. So some is better than none. And I think the problem, especially nowadays, is we're sitting so much, and that's the problem. And so breaking up sedentary time is so key. When we sit for too long, blood flow to the brain decreases, and you can't think well, you don't feel well. It's more difficult to sleep. And so breaking up these times is really, really beneficial.
Just a personal story from my side is like when I am out exercising, and on those rare occasions when I'm actually really pushing myself and it starts to hurt, I find that just finding my breath and saying, wait a minute, my breathing rhythm is off, that not only helps my body feel better, but it also helps my mind feel better. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you've experienced as well?
Absolutely. And through the breath is a great way that we can gain control of our mind and our body. Your mind it really only has one track. It can only think about one thing at a time. And if you're thinking about your breath, it can't think about how much pain you're in, the anguish you're feeling, or the panic or the nervousness. It's the breath. And that's so grounding and centering. The amazing thing is that when we control our breath, we slow down the nervous system. We trigger the autonomic nervous system that rest or digest, and it triggers us into a calmer state of being.
Aside from the fact that our brain is telling us don't exercise because you're consuming too many calories and taking it away from the brain, what do you have to say to the people in our society now that are, they're stuck on their iPhone, they're stuck on their desktop, creating stress by being on that, but also forcing them to sit in a chair and really do nothing? What commonsensical thing do you advise to your clients when they come to the NeuroFit Lab?
Every 30 minutes, stand up and take a 2-minute movement break. That's incredibly beneficial for increasing blood flow to the brain. It's so simple too, right? I'm not telling you.
Next time I'm in the middle of a craniotomy, I want to stand up.
Or you could exercise before your craniotomy.
Yeah.
The benefits of exercise linger for a long time after each workout. So.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what's next for you? What's your next amazing thing that you're going to try to achieve?
You know what? I haven't figured it out yet. I poured my whole heart and soul, my whole life into writing this book. It has my research, my personal story. It was a real journey for me. After you do something so major in your life, I'm just taking a pause to just reflect and enjoy the process before jumping into something next.
Was it difficult for you to open up and reveal yourself, or did you feel that that was the best way to relay how important this is? It's important to you. It should be important to everybody.
Oh my God, it's so hard. It's still hard to talk about my own personal struggles, but I knew that it would really give credence to the science I was talking about. I know what it's like. I've experienced it personally, and I'm not just talking at them. I'm talking to them as someone who has experienced this before and has succeeded in learning to manage, my own mental health issues.
The thing that I found so hopeful from you is that, listen, you might feel a little bit depressed. Try something commonsensical like exercise. And it may be of benefit to you. And, you can avoid all these other things.
I completely agree with you. I wouldn't want to say don't try antidepressants because those are so helpful for so many people. It's not a one or the other. It's this other thing that we can do to better our health.
Jennifer Heisz, it's been delightful to meet you and have this opportunity to talk about your book, Move the Body, Heal the Mind. I found the book enlightening and uplifting. It will, I hope, help me focus and get over the hump of being able to exercise consistently. You're a credit to the neuroscience community, and I wish you all success with the publication of your new book.
Oh, thank you very much.
This Is Your Brain with Dr. Phil Steig is produced for the Weill Cornell Brain and Spine Center by the Really Interesting Picture Company. The episode producers are Geraldine Abinader and Hildy Rubin. The series is directed and edited by Tom Veltri, with music by Lenny Williams of Load Bearing Music. The announcer is Allison Power. Please contact us at drphilsteague.com or follow us on Facebook at This Is Your Brain.